Okay, welcome to part three of revenue models. This is kind of an interesting one. It's not super common, but I thought I'd throw it out there just because it is kind of an interesting one. So unbundling refers to taking an existing business and then pulling it apart. So you may specialize in one particular area. The key to this one is allowing more price discrimination among customers. So Sling TV is one example of this. And essentially, if you think about cable, most people hate cable companies. And part of the reason for that hate is you have so few options. If you want to, you essentially have to purchase cable if you want access to a bunch of stuff, including things like ESPN and so forth. Now, this is changing, obviously, very rapidly with streaming services, and more people are saying no to cable. But for a long time, cable was really the only way you could access a lot of products or services. So now companies like Sling TV have come out and said, well, what if we offer you a package where you only have to purchase, instead of 700 channels, you can purchase the 5 that you want or the 10 that you want, and there's different packages. So you take the existing cable model and you split it into pieces and allow people to select exactly what they want or don't want. Allegiant Air. Allegiant Air is another fantastic example of unbundling. So traditionally, like when I was a kid, I remember going on airlines and a lot of things were different. Security wasn't near the hassle it is today. It was a lot safer. People could go all the way up to the gate to say goodbye, to loved ones as you sent them off on flights. But you'd get on the flight and almost anywhere you went, you'd get a hot meal. And obviously that's changed. And it was all included in the price of the ticket, right? And lots of, you could reschedule, you could cancel, you had lots of options, and everybody paid the same thing. Well, more and more airlines are unbundling, and so Allegiant Air is a great example of this. So when I fly, we often fly Allegiant Air with my family because I'm cheap, right? And we go out to Utah over the summer. My wife's from there, and so we can get a flight into Salt Lake for like $400 or $500 a person, or we can get on an Allegiant Air flight from Cincinnati, take a direct flight into Las Vegas, and it costs us, $200 a piece. And then we rent a car and we drive north, and we can get to where we need to go in about 5.5, 6 hours in central Utah. But when we hop on Allegiant Air, the reason it's $200 each is because if you want to take luggage, that'll cost you extra. If you want to have a drink on the flight, if you even a cup of water, you have to buy a bottle of water. If you want to bring an overhead, carry-on item, you can put your backpack down for free, but if it fits under the seat. But if you want to bring a carry-on piece of luggage, you have to pay extra for that. And so what they've done is, instead of charging $400 for the ticket and just including everything, they allow you to pick and choose exactly what services and products you want. And so it makes the ticket cheaper, but then anything else you have to decide if you want to purchase it or not. And I've had pretty good luck with that. We typically, my family will condense down to maybe bringing 2 or maybe 3 suitcases for all 6 of us. We buy stuff in the airport ahead of time or bring stuff ahead of time in terms of snacks and things. The kids, they're flexible. It's just exciting to get on a plane. And so it's a cheap way for us to do it. But any additional product or service we have to pay extra for. Now, there are downsides to this model. So I took Allegiant out to Vegas one time. My sister was getting married out in LA, and it was cheap to fly Allegiant into Vegas, rent a car, and go down. And as we were sitting in the tarmac waiting to take back off, I look over, the next Allegiant plane over is on fire. Like there's like smoke billowing out the back. Nobody got hurt or anything, but I just thought, man, glad that's not my flight. I guess it's the downside of flying the cheapest airline on the planet, right? But in general, it allows price discriminating customers to make the decisions they want to make. So again, who's the customer? Who's the consumer? In this case, you're probably looking for customers who are very price discriminating. What's the cost structure? How much does it cost Allegiant to carry an extra bag or deliver snacks and food and stuff? And they've actually carved those costs out. What happens during a single transaction? Again, they're thinking very carefully about all the different things that you might want on a flight, and what are the costs of each individual thing. What's the relationship? In this case, it's a very transactional relationship. You know, we recognize that you're buying from us because we're cheap, and that's what we're delivering. And how do they acquire customers? Again, they're thoughtful about going after people who value the cheap options. Multi-sided platforms. This is an interesting one, and this is an important one. This comes up all the time. What you're doing here is you're bringing together distinct but interdependent sets of customers. And usually you're creating value by generating interaction between these groups, and we'll talk about what network effects mean. So this sounds complicated, but really what you've got to envision is you've got a group of customers on one side, somebody who wants to, let's say, buy something. You've got a group of potential sellers on the other side. They want to purchase these things, but for some reason they can't interact. And the multi-sided platform sits in the middle, and the multi-sided platform helps connect the group of buyers and the group of sellers. So examples are Airbnb, eBay, Amazon, Uber, and let's just take Airbnb. So we've got a group of people that are willing to rent out their homes or bedrooms or whatever it might be to travelers. You've got a group of interested customers who say, yeah, we'd love to go to a city and rent a space, not in a hotel, get either a cheaper experience or a unique experience. But there's something that keeps these transactions from occurring. There's something that keeps the buyers and sellers apart. And Airbnb steps into the middle and says, here, let us facilitate these transactions, and we'll just take a cut of what happens. And this is essentially how eBay works, Amazon works, Uber works, all of these. And so what's really important is understanding what stops these customers, the buyers and sellers, from getting together on their own, and then making sure that your model facilitates this connection. And so if we think about Airbnb, it's a great reason to say, okay, what would stop somebody? What would stop me from just going through Craigslist or a newspaper ad or random phone calls? And there's a couple of different things, right? So why can't I as a seller just reach out to somebody, or sorry, I as a buyer or a seller, reach out and just make these transactions happen without Airbnb? Well, it might be a lack of information. Maybe I just don't know who's willing to rent me a room in their house in New York. I just have no idea. And so one of the things that Airbnb or Uber or anything else does is provide a clearinghouse, a platform where information gets aggregated and shared. It might be risk. Maybe I say, well, I'd like to rent out my house, but what happens if the buyer burns it to the ground? Like, what do I do then? And so part of what Airbnb does is mitigate risk. They say, great, we've got $1 million insurance policy. If somebody burns your house to the ground, we will pay for that. We'll pay for you to rebuild, right? Or maybe it's trust. Maybe what's stopping people from coming together is trust and saying, well, you know, what if I go to this house and it turns out they're a weirdo? Or what if there's a bait and switch and they say they're going to rent me this beautiful house, and this does happen on Airbnb, it's a real concern. And 2 days before the rental, they say, oh, you know what, we've had some plumbing problems, we need to shift you to a different house. And then they charge me the same rate for just some dump, right? And so if you think about the way Airbnb is set up, they provide information, they try to mitigate risk, and they try to build trust, and often they do the trust through the ratings. So I'm much more comfortable staying with a super host on Airbnb than with just a regular host. It means that they've got a lot of good ratings. It means that I feel more comfortable trusting that they're actually going to provide the experience that I believe I paid for. If you're looking for a fun little break right now, check out the YouTube video 5 Stars. It's an SNL Saturday Night Live video with Aziz Ansari. It's just kind of a play on this notion of rating people based on trust. So the key here with any kind of multi-sided platform is you really need to understand what's stopping people from interacting on their own, and then making sure that whatever you do is going to facilitate that transaction. So how are you going to create trust, mitigate risk, supply information? What kind of information do people need? Diving into the details there and really understanding that will help you as you're trying to build a multi-sided platform. Multi-sided platforms, one other thing I'll say about them is they do have a chicken and egg problem. So you can imagine eBay when it's first launching, and you could say, okay, I'm a potential customer. I hop on eBay and I find that there's very little for sale. And I think, oh, well, I'm not very interested because there's no sellers on here. And you can imagine eBay when it's first launching, and you can imagine maybe I've got some things to sell on eBay, and I hop on and I realize, oh, there's no buyers on this platform. Oh, I'm not very interested in posting my stuff for sale here. So there's this chicken and an egg problem where I say, okay, well, buyers won't come on without sellers, and sellers won't come on without buyers. So what do we do? And so it becomes very, very important to think carefully about how we incentivize and get buyers to hop on and sellers to hop on, because there's network effects. And so what this means is the more people, the larger the network of people using the platform, the more valuable it is. And so we, when you're trying to launch one, you essentially have zero network. And so you've got to figure out, how do we get people on our site, and how do we overcome this initial chicken and egg challenge? And there's lots of ways to do it. There's also lots of examples of failed companies that haven't done this well. So places like My College Yard Sale, they built out this platform to allow buyers and sellers on college campuses to sell things, right? And they just, you'd click on Ohio State and there'd be like 3 things to sell, right? And you'd click on Miami and there'd be maybe 4 things. And so they had every school in the U.S. listed, but there was very little in terms of actual stuff, being bought or sold. And so very quickly, potential buyers lost interest and went somewhere else. So thinking through how to overcome this, you can incentivize, you can sponsor, you can provide, there's lots of ways to kind of get the ball rolling. But you want to think very carefully about, how do we incentivize a group of, and usually it's the sellers, how do we incentivize a group of sellers to get on our platform and provide their products or services to potential buyers, so we can start this process going. Retail Me Not is an interesting example of a multi-sided platform. And essentially, if you get on Retail Me Not, for those of you who've used it before, you can search for online coupons. And what you've got on the one hand is you've got buyers who are interested in finding online deals, and you've got sellers who are interested in attracting buyers with their coupons. And Retail Me Not is a space in the middle that becomes a clearinghouse for these online deals. And you'll see features like, how many people have used this deal today. It helps cover information costs. It has very little risk, so they don't have to worry about risk very much. And it provides, information to, and that's probably the biggest hurdle Retail Me Not overcomes, is just an information problem by providing a one-stop shop, a one-stop clearinghouse where everybody can come and find online coupons. So there's lots of applications of these multi-sided platforms. One variation on the multi-sided platform is using ad revenue. So if you think about Facebook, Facebook is just essentially a multi-sided platform that's bringing together users, potential buyers of products, and people who want to sell stuff. Facebook makes all their money through ad revenue. So everything they do around connecting and communicating and stuff, that's all a sideshow to their real business, which is selling ad revenue. And so you want to make sure, if you've got if your revenue model is based on advertisements, you want to make sure how much you will really earn from ads. And the answer is not very much per ad, per impression, per click. You really need to understand, and there's lots of good resources out there to figure out what those numbers are. Usually this is going to require pretty massive scale. So think Facebook style scale, several billion users, and very little variable costs. So ad revenues don't work very well if it costs you something every time you deliver a product or service. So think technology companies. These are usually when you're going to see ad revenues. And they're also often combined with a freemium model. So you might have a free version that has ads, and then a premium version where those ads get removed. So ad revenue are common for apps and things like that. But you should be very aware of how much you're actually going to make, what scale you're going to need to make anything substantial, and probably think about combining it with other revenue sources such as a freemium model. So again, who's our customer? Who's our consumer? This is true, especially with ad models. Facebook's consumers are you and I and everybody else, but their customer are the companies posting ads. So have that distinction clear in your mind. Think about your cost structure. What is it costing us to build this multi-sided platform? What additional cost do we incur every time there's a transaction? What happens to our cost during a single transaction? What's our relationship with the customer consumer? Are we gonna require that they sign in? Are we gonna require that they create a profile? How are we gonna manage this kind of relationship? How are we gonna make sure, this one's a little more complicated too, because how are we going to make sure that we manage the relationship between the buyers and sellers on our platform? So we've got to think pretty carefully about that. And then how do we acquire customers, especially with this chicken and egg issue as you're setting up a multi-sided platform for the first time. So we'll go ahead and stop this video here, and we'll keep going in a few minutes with part 4 of revenue models.